literature lovers and food friends. It's Diana, and I'm here exploring the intersection of food and literature. So in the last series, the food was honey, and we looked at a Russian honey cake. And I thought about it and I thought, well, I didn't really do just honey. So I wanted to do that, just honey. And when I thought honey, I thought of Winnie-the-Pooh. There are actually two Pooh books by A. Milne. There's the Winnie-the-Pooh, and then there's the, I have it, here it is, The House at Pooh Corner. And then there are also two books of poetry. When we were very young and now we are six, something like that. They're actually right over there. When I was a kid, so this is another nostalgic book for me. We had one big book with the two books of poetry and the two books of Pooh stories, and my mother would read them to us. And then there was also the Disney Winnie-the-Pooh, the one from the 1970s, that was part of my childhood. So the stories aren't just nostalgic for me, they're nostalgic for a lot of people, and they're pretty well known. And the characters are even better known. But I thought, you know what? That's no reason to not talk about it. In fact, that might be a reason to talk about it. Honey runs throughout both books because Pooh runs through both books, and honey is pretty much close to Pooh's heart. But what I chose to do is to pick one of the books, and I went with the first book, and one of the chapters in the book. In the book form, the chapters, though they relate to one another, they are also pretty independent as small stories or small tales. I had a hard time because there's one story in the second book that I really wanted to do, but I went ahead and chose the second chapter of the first book. And the second chapter is called In Which Pooh Goes Visiting and Gets Into a Tight Place. All the chapters in this book start with the phrase "in which." And so in this chapter / story, we start with Pooh in his home, and he's doing his stoutness exercises, and he's making up a little song. And what I noticed in rereading again many of these chapters is that Pooh makes up songs a lot. And in that way, he's like Francis from Best Friends for Francis. I do enjoy a character who makes up songs because I make up songs. So Pooh's walking through the forest, and he comes upon a sandy bank with a hole in it, and it makes him think of his friend Rabbit, and it is indeed Rabbit's home. So Rabbit in the Pooh stories in the actual book looks a lot like a rabbit, not like a cartoon rabbit. Oh, and I didn't mention that, so there are illustrations. They're called decorations in the front. I love that. It says with decorations by Ernest H. Shepard. And they look like pen and ink. And I've noticed that a lot of illustrations that are from my childhood and that I really like are pen and ink. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'm understanding why I like to make art with pen and ink. That's another story. That's a different thing. Okay, so Pooh goes to Rabbit's house, and he calls in. You can't knock on a door of a hole because there is no door. And Rabbit is a little tentative to even admit he's home or that he's Rabbit. And when Pooh says who he is, Rabbit's like, are you sure? And it's not, I don't want to visit with you, Pooh. It's, you can't be too careful when somebody comes to your door in the forest. You don't know who they are. Sounds like good reasoning. But when Rabbit sees that it's Pooh, he invites him in. And he says it's about time for, he doesn't say this, but it is about time for an early lunch. And he asks Pooh if he would like honey or condensed milk with his bread. And Pooh quickly says both. He's very excited that Rabbit has asked him to eat because he was feeling like it was time for that. And after he says both, he feels like, oh, maybe that was a little too greedy, so he doesn't want to seem greedy. So he says, but don't worry about the bread or the plate. Don't worry about the plate. And he proceeds to eat all of Rabbit's honey and, I'm assuming, condensed milk out of the container. Why not? Honey out of a container is very yummy. So when Pooh finishes, he says, oh, I must be going, but does say something to the effect of, unless you have more. And Rabbit says, no, you ate it all. Unfortunately for Pooh, when he tries to get out through the hole he came in, he no longer fits. He has eaten too much honey and too much condensed milk. I forget about the condensed milk sometimes, most of the time, until I read it again. And he not only can't fit, he gets stuck. He can't go in, he can't go out. He's in a tight place in which Pooh gets stuck, goes visiting, and gets into a tight place. And the tight place is Rabbit's entry hole. So whenever there's a problem in the land of Pooh and the other animals, the problem solver is Christopher Robin. So Rabbit goes to get Christopher Robin. Christopher Robin comes, confirms that Pooh is indeed stuck, and says, well, you're going to have to not eat until you get thin again. No meals. And Pooh's like, how long is that going to take? And Christopher Robin says about a week. But we'll read to you. And I love that the comforting thing is we'll read to you. And it makes sense that somebody who is interested in creating stories, to me, that it makes sense that somebody creating stories would find indulging in stories a comfort. So Pooh asks that they be sustaining stories. And Christopher Robin says, okay. So Christopher Robin reads to Winnie-the-Pooh while the week is going by. And Rabbit makes the best of the other end of Pooh with his little feet sticking out and hangs towels or washing on his legs to dry or to store. After about a week, Christopher Robin decides it's time to try to get Pooh out. And Christopher Robin and Rabbit and all of Rabbit's friends and relations, and throughout the book there's a group of beings that are called Rabbit's friends and relations. They all line up and pull Pooh out, and they pull, and then pop, like a cork, he comes out and is very grateful. That's kind of where that chapter ends. It doesn't automatically lead into another one. Like I said, they're kind of self-contained stories. Now, another thing I didn't mention is that there is kind of a frame around all this, or a premise of how these stories are being told. And that's the first chapter of this book, Winnie-the-Pooh, in which we're introduced to Winnie-the-Pooh, which I don't think that's what it's called, but it's a voice that seems like a father who's telling stories to his son, whose name is Christopher Robin, about the son's own toys. So the toys become characters, and the son becomes a character. And every now and then, the son interjects. So Christopher Robin, the person, interjects and will ask questions, usually at the beginning or end, not so much in the middle of the story. So that's one chapter of Winnie-the-Pooh. They're quite short, seen as stories, and the whole book itself wouldn't take that long to read. I've been breaking them up and only reading one story a day, so it's taken me a little bit. But okay, so that's Winnie-the-Pooh, at least one chapter of Winnie-the-Pooh, and we can see how honey is integral to this chapter at least. And next we will look at honey, just plain honey. I will not make cake with it, but I might make some condensed milk. Okay, see y'all next time. Thanks for joining me.